Hey, my name is Tim Smith. I'm the product manager for Chef Infra, and I'm here with Dan Webb. And Dan is going to take it away and talk a little bit about this series and what we're talking about and everything we have to offer you.
We've got a bunch of on-demand webinars, our best practice series that we've been doing for a few months now. So short snippets of best practices, a way of operating Chef Infra. They're all on the chef.io domain /campaigns. If you drop the link there, you'll see all of the stuff we've got there. We've got things from custom resources that we did out, I think that was like 6 months ago now. That was like sort of the start of the best practices webinar, and then up to sort of automating chef deployments and GitHub actions and that kind of stuff. So I could reel through the entire list there, but I'll save that for another time. But yeah, there's some really interesting things there. No, I won't. No, I mean, yeah. But what I will tell you is we have a Tuesday stream and a Thursday stream. So I'll do it in GMT. Apologies if you're going to I think it's Eastern. It's 10 a.m. Eastern till 11 a.m. Eastern. We have a Tuesday, Thursday stream every week. Where Tuesday stream we do a quick product demo of something we've found interesting in one of the products that week. And our Thursday stream is our hallway track. We love that. We have a guest on. Hopefully one day we'll have Tim on, and I'll pick his brains about something there. We've just had a guest on probably half an hour ago. We finished one of the winners of our hackathon this year. We had a great chat with him and his one push solution. So yeah, catch us on Thursdays. They are my favorite ones. I do love the Tuesday ones, but the Thursday ones are cracking.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to take it away here. This is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. You'll see Dan in a bit when we get down to the bottom there at the demo, but first we're going to start off talking a little bit about what the compliance phase is for anybody that's not super familiar about the compliance phase and what we've launched and what we've been working on lately. Then we're going to talk about some of the new features in compliance phase. This is something that we're continuing to evolve as we get feedback, as we see where it's working and see where we can improve it. We've made a lot of changes to it since we launched it, so we want to talk about some of that new stuff. Then, like I said, we'll go to that demo. Dan will show off kind of an end-to-end solution where we show the complete testing of some policy, promoting it up, bootstrapping a system, seeing it and automate the whole deal, which would be really great to see. And then we'll take questions for anybody who has questions about, how they migrate to this or implement it or any of that kind of stuff. So first of all, what is policy as code? That's kind of what the compliance phase is all about. This is about us realizing this vision we have for an idea of policy as code. And it's really kind of an evolution of what you've seen previously with us. If you're familiar with using Chef Infra for infrastructure as code, this is kind of the idea that, the world isn't just infrastructure anymore. Now we have to have security and compliance concerns, and we want to be able to test that all and promote that all and do that all kind of using some of those same principles that we did with infrastructure as code. So on the left here, we're going to test our policy locally. We're going to be developing and testing that. We're going to iterate on it. You're going to go through all the motions, the same kind of stuff you would have done with Chef Infra, but now it's going to be not just infra recipes and resources, but also InSpec profiles and controls. You're going to push that change up into the Chef Infra server. You'll bring that down to all the clients. All the clients, as they check in, will execute that infrastructure code. Now they're also going to execute a compliance and security scan, and we'll promote both of those states up into Automate, where we're going to do continuous reporting and trigger any workflows. We give you APIs there. We give you ways to get that out into things like ServiceNow, into webhooks, into Slack, so you can kind of get that visibility into what's going on, not just in the infrastructure side, as you've done in the past, but also now in that compliance and security side. So this is a diagram you'll probably see more and more of. We're kind of slapping this all over. If that sounds really familiar to the way that Chef Infra works today, that is the point. What we're talking about here is the ability to kind of bring together these two concerns in a workflow that you're already really familiar with. We think there's some great advantages, particularly advantages to using Chef to achieve policy as code. The first is that what we're talking about here is an integrated solution. We're not talking about bringing in a security tool that bolts on to an infrastructure management tool. We're talking about bringing those all into the same workflows, the same tooling, the same execution, the same agents. And a lot of it is all about testing at its core. Testing is always an important thing for Chef. going all the way back to our origins, things like Test Kitchen, things like Chef Spec, things like Cook Style. These have all been kind of ideas that we've always had. We strongly believe in things like test-driven development. And this is really important, especially in the security and compliance world. We want to make sure that those systems are continuously tested for security and compliance. We have a ton of robust content, and we have an engine that allows you to grow with that content. So we're not just providing you with a bunch of canned CIS and STIG content that you apply on the nodes. We're also allowing you to start with that content, but build up into your own security policies. No business just needs CIS. They need CIS plus a bunch of kind of homegrown rules that they have that apply just for their business. And the InSpec engine allows you to do that. Apply that content and then write some of your own and ship those in a cookbook, which we'll talk about. We also have reporting and data portability. We don't want to lock your data in. We don't want to make you have to spend your life and automate. We want to make it so that we can use that as a place to view the state of the infrastructure, but also you can get your data out. So like I said, APIs there, webhooks, Slack, places like ServiceNow or S3. You can push data all over the place and kind of bring it into your workflows. If you want to put it into Splunk, bring it into Splunk. That's fine with us. We don't want to hold your data hostage. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about the compliance phase. And this is kind of how we're making policy as code a reality. This is something that started with Chef Infra Compliance 17.0. And it replaces the Audit Cookbook. If you're an Audit Cookbook user, this is the replacement for the Audit Cookbook. We'll talk a little bit about how it's fully backwards compatible with that. But it's a really easy way to jump into this integrated world where you have the Chef Infra client being responsible for not just the infrastructure, but now also the compliance as well, without needing a cookbook or anything to do. We think that this gives you a really nice integrated solution, and it's built on a bunch of really great tech that exists in both of these projects. So on the infrastructure side, we have Chef Infra client. We have a whole great, powerful language there. We have system state gathering with OHI. We have 170 built-in resources. On the InSpec side, we have a fantastic, security and compliance framework there. Again, we also have a really powerful auditing language. We have 500 built-in resources, and I think that number might actually be 600 plus built-in resources. The team has been going just wild, adding resources for new clouds and new databases and new app servers. So there's a whole bunch of built-in stuff there that makes extending that, writing your own business rules really easy. So we want to bring these two tools together. At its core, obviously, this is going to be the Chef Infra language. We're executing this through the Chef Infra client. We have cookbooks, recipes, and resources there. And we have a whole bunch of things like, this VS Code editor you can see on the right that's doing some nice auto-completes for us. We also have the Chef InSpec language, really similar to the Infra language. This has profiles, controls, and tests with resources and matchers underneath that. Provides an RSpec-like experience for writing specs to make sure that certain security and compliance controls are happening. Like I said, we have 500, 600 maybe built-in resources here, tons of stuff to get started. So you don't have to do tons of shellouts. You're not, writing regexes and parsing command output. You can do things like, is a package installed? Is a firewall rule there? And you can write that kind of in a somewhat natural language instead of having to, remember every time how to anchor a regex or what a no match is there. The thing that compliance phase brings to us, though, is really bringing these two experiences, bringing these two great languages together. We want to do that all in the Infra client. We want you to have that single client that you already have deployed. And we're doing this by breaking that execution of the client into two distinct phases. The first is the Infra phase, and that's the phase that you're probably familiar with already if you're using Chef Infra client. This is where you're going to go through your cookbooks, you're going to execute recipes, resources, do things like reporting out into Automate. When that's complete, then we're going to kick off into the new compliance phase. And this is where we're going to start executing InSpec. This is what would previously have happened within the Audit Cookbook, using some kind of hooks onto the end of the run. We're now doing this in a really distinct phase that's actually, fully integrated part of the product. And this will allow you to execute those profiles, go through all the different controls, also bring on waivers and inputs. And we'll talk a little bit about how we kind of glue the two of those together and allow you to kind of pass information between them and make sure that you can, run a compliance phase run that works based off of things that happened in your infrastructure, which is the real key there. That these are acting as a single product. You're not using some third-party tool that has no connection to what's going on in your Chef Infra changes. You obviously want to be able to, do different audits in maybe your pre-prod or your prod environment, or do different audits in different clouds. And we're going to give you that capability, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So we get kind of the best of both worlds here with the policy as code. We get that shared testing language. We already have InSpec. If you're an Infra user, you're already using that, hopefully, to test cookbooks. You're using those 500, 600 resources to go through and do things like, hey, is the service running afterwards? Is this HTTP port open? Does it return this data? Can I parse this JSON that my API gives me? Now that same language that you're already writing to confirm that infrastructure is being used over on the compliance side, which is fantastic for teams. There isn't another language to learn. You have a shared language. You can get compliance and security teams helping out infrastructure teams, and infrastructure teams helping out compliance and security teams. There isn't any new client to deploy here. This is all through the Chef Infra client. And that means there's kind of a nice, simple path to production, right? We don't have another CI pipeline. We don't have another tool you have to push out. This is all through the existing pipelines and tooling that you already have. The power we get there is being able to use the immutable objects that Chef brings, things like policy files, being able to promote now security and compliance changes the same way we're promoting our infrastructure changes. And we get all that test tooling. So we get to bring this security and compliance work into that testing infrastructure we already have. We can run security and compliance through Test Kitchen and verify the compliance of systems. And we have cook style rules now specifically for InSpec. So we'll be able to lint your security code and look at that and kind of give you feedback on how you're writing that code. So this all started with the compliance phase in the 17.0 release of Chef. This shipped in April. Feels like it just happened, but it turns out it was last year. And this is kind of the basic output you're going to get from that. Really simple. At the end of the run, you flip in the compliance phase, you start seeing a profile executing here. This is a really simple example profile. We're making sure that there's a temp directory and making sure it's owned by root. You see that output right there, which is one of the kind of great features over the Audit Cookbook, giving you kind of improved logging, improved output. But the real great part is kind of that migration path that we have here. Like I was saying before, this is a fully backwards compatible migration from Audit Cookbook users. It's utilizing all the existing audit node attributes. So node audit, whatever is going to work. Any existing profiles you're loading, profiles that you might have pulled off a supermarket, off of GitHub, off of Automate, those will all continue to work. We've got some great new stuff, but we wanted to first make sure that we had a path for all of our existing users, so we didn't leave anybody out on the legacy cookbook. That simple migration path, I think, is really going to let people jump into some of the newer stuff that we're talking about here. But we want to make sure that this is fully backwards compatible for all the users. If you want to opt into it, you set a single attribute. If you want to continue to use the Audit Cookbook for now, you can continue to use that just the same, even in 17.0 and later. Just don't set the attribute. The great part here, though, is that there's nothing to upgrade again. There's no code that you have to worry about in the Audit Cookbook. You don't have to worry about compatibility between that cookbook and the version of Chef you're on. That becomes our problem, right? Anytime you upgrade the client, you're automatically going to have the latest version of all the compliance phase code. You're going to know that that compliance phase code is fully tested for that version of the Chef client. You're also going to get documentation. Documentation is no longer within the Audit Cookbook. Now it's right on the docs.chef.io page. You can go under the Infra client and you can read all about compliance phase with a whole new set of docs that kind of explains how to go through and set these up and how to migrate off of the legacy Audit Cookbook. We did obviously want to provide an improved experience there. This isn't just about providing a backwards compatibility kind of stepping stone. We wanted to improve some of the output logging. First, we shipped this CLI reporter. Then in 17.1 and later, we made that default. So you're always going to get CLI output. That means if you hop on a system and you run Chef Client, you'll see that output. If you're running in Test Kitchen, you'll see that output. If you're going through logs, reporting to syslog or event logs or anything, you're going to see the compliance phase run, which is really useful in troubleshooting systems. It also has a ton of improved error handling. We went through under the hood and really rewrote the whole way this works. Tons and tons of error handling and improved logging for errors, which makes it a lot easier to figure out when something goes wrong. If you don't have something configured right, you don't have a token, or you're not pulling data correctly to be able to get a profile out of Automate or GitHub, you'll get really nice errors now instead of just kind of like weird cryptic failures that you might have seen before. We have a great integration within Infra. By default now in 17.4 and later, we're going to pass all of the Infra node attributes right into InSpec, and that means that you can write controls that use that data. So anything that OHI detected or anything that you set for any of your business logic is going to be available for you in those controls. That's a really great way to kind of pass data from that infra state into the controls and change what you're auditing based on the state of the system, which is a really nice way. Again, things like, what cloud am I on? What hypervisor am I on? What data center, what rack? If you have that data coming out of OHI, which you can write OHI plugins for, to interact with inventory DBs or whatnot, you can pass that now into your audits and do all kinds of great stuff with the audits. We're also not writing any information to disk. Previously, the audit cookbook wrote a weird little JSON file to disk that could expose auditing secrets potentially. That would be sitting on disk for anybody. It's owned by root, but that still is a security concern for a lot of people. That data is not there anymore. If you want the data on disk, if you want to process that through some other third-party tool, you can opt into that, but now that is an opt-in thing to have that data on disk, which nicely improves the security with a real simple little change. This is the real killer feature though, and this is kind of the one I want to talk about as we talk about what's new in compliance phase, and that is the single artifact compliance phase. This is something we shipped in 17.5 several months ago, I guess, five months after September, probably September or October. This allows you to ship those compliance and security profiles right in the cookbooks. This is a really great one. I think that this is really going to kind of change the way that people do their development. Previously with the audit cookbook, you had a compliance profile that was running, and even with the compliance phase, a compliance profile that ran as part of Chef Infra, but it wasn't in the cookbook. And that meant that you had development that was happening in different places. You didn't have that kind of DevSecOps world where the teams are all collaborating on a single tool. You didn't have the single pipeline because you had code that might be in Automate. You had code that might be on the supermarket. You had code that might be in GitHub. Now you have code in a single place. And what that means is that from the very start of any project that you take on, any sort of infrastructure change you're going to make, you can make sure that you create a nice InSpec profile first. You set up the compliance phase and you run that and you do TDD for your security. And you can make sure these things stay secure as you develop them locally. Every time you run Test Kitchen, you're going to see all these local controls run. And they'll be in all your CI pipelines, which is a really awesome improvement to how this all works. So this is a little bit of how it looks on disk. There's a new compliance directory here. And in that directory, you have a few different folders. The first folder is inputs. This allows you to put one or more InSpec input files in. You also have a profile directory. Again, you can put as many profiles in there as you want. And you have a waivers directory for any waivers you want. On the right here, you'll see that we're going to load those in. We're going to force their execution. We're going to decide kind of where and when they run the same way we would with the recipe. So this looks really similar. Include recipe. Now we have include profile, include input, and include waiver. And it has a few different ways it can work. You can see my important cookbook is the name of this cookbook. I can load that profile by name directly. So : temp, really similar to how we would load a cookbook recipe. I can also load all of the inputs by just putting a splat in there, or I can kind of do name expansion. So I can say, I want to load any waiver that starts with control. So there's a few different options on how you load that. But this gives you a really great way to be able to load those profiles when you want, and you can ship those and not load them. You can load them in different cookbooks. You can do whatever you want. Really nice amount of power and control into how you load them, which I'll show a little bit more of in this next slide here. This is the second way you can go about bringing the two products together. We have a new InSpec waiver and an InSpec input resource. This allows you to define those waivers and those inputs directly within Chef. And the cool part that you get here that I'm kind of showing is some of this power of really defining and bringing these two products together, defining that compliance and security right in your infra code, is that you can do things like bring in node attributes here. So I can change the justification that goes out to automate based on the policy group that I'm running by using my node policy group attribute. I can do things like load from a source on disk. This might be laid down by Chef. This might be, a remote file resource that pulls this down first, or any other kind of thing, right? I could lay this down with a third-party tool if I wanted to, but I can source this right from disk. And then I can also do things like using all the helpers that are in the Chef Infra language. So if I have a specific input that I want to pull in just on EC2, I can do something like if EC2 here. I could do if a node attribute. I could do, if I'm in VMware, I could do all kinds of different checks to decide when and where I run this, which is really great. This gives you kind of the power to have different profiles that you would execute if you were in maybe GCE versus EC2 versus a local data center. It makes it really easy to kind of build out these, multi-operating system, multi-cloud compliance postures. So we think the single artifact deploy method that I'm showing there is a really great improvement to how you go about bringing in your compliance and your security content. Here it is on the right running. You can see it loading the different inputs and the profiles, and then down at the bottom, we get the compliance phase kicking off. There's obviously a bit of code I have to snip out because this would be a lot longer logging. So you don't see kind of the start of the phase or anything like that, but you see that report that comes down at the bottom. Gives you a really nice unified experience. Bringing those waivers and inputs directly into the recipe code, deciding exactly where and how you load things like profiles and shipping them right in the product is really key to kind of tying these two experiences together. And the best part is that you're really shifting your security concerns. So the ability to run this in Test Kitchen, the ability to have cook style rules for your security means that you're doing this as part of your development process. You're not bolting on security after things have already gone to production. As you test them on your local workstation, you're testing the security of them. And you're making sure that they're going to pass. If you have a CIS profile you want to run on all your systems, you can apply that CIS profile right as you do that development, and you make sure every Test Kitchen run, this system passes your CIS profiles, which is really powerful. And if you want to waive something, you can waive it. You can waive it right in the code. You can waive it with a waiver file or with that waiver resource as well. The thing that we think that this also gives is bringing some of those enhanced practices to these security and compliance teams. The same way people like myself and ops kind of had to level into this world of development as we had the DevOps world, we're kind of getting some of those same things with DevSecOps. We're bringing security teams into things like code reviews, PRs, CI pipelines, version artifacts, immutable deploys. We're bringing some of these great development practices into the security and compliance world and having them work with the way that products go to production, right? This is how we're pushing things out in our businesses, and now we can push that security change the same way we push all of our other content. The really great part that I was talking about a little bit before of kind of that concept of immutable deploys and why we think this is important. The really great thing we get now is this ability to have a policy file with a version cookbook in there that's locked. And that cookbook doesn't just contain infra recipes, but now it also contains all of our InSpec profiles. That means we have now an immutable object. We're testing that object locally. We're seeing in Test Kitchen that it meets all of our infrastructure needs. We have potentially written InSpec tests to check that, to curl websites, to check HTTP outputs. We've also written now our InSpec profiles for our compliance and security. So we know locally on our workstation that this system is going to pass our business requirements. Now, as we promote that into a development, staging, production environment, it's the exact same artifact, right? It's locked by the policy file. It won't change. If somebody uploads a new version of that cookbook, it won't start running. If they change attributes somewhere, it won't change. It's an immutable artifact straight to production. And that means now we get immutable security changes into production, which is a really awesome new feature. And then the last thing before I hand this off to Dan that I want to talk about is our new generators. This is coming later this month, just merged in last night. I believe we have a current build, maybe not, but this is a whole bunch of new functionality within the chef generate cookbook command. Now, when you run chef generate cookbook, you're going to get a cookbook that already has a compliance directory. Within that compliance directory, it's going to have inputs and profiles and waivers directories, and it's going to have a README that kind of takes you off to that InSpec docs, tells you what goes in this directory, tells you kind of a little bit more information about how the compliance phase works. We've also added new generate commands to help you generate inputs, waivers, and InSpec profiles. So right in that chef generate command, if you want to write your first InSpec profile, you can just chef generate profile foo, and you'll get it fully built out. You'll have all the metadata correct. You'll have the naming and the titles and the copyrights and everything will match up the same way you've always done with Chef Generate Cookbook. It's a really great way to get started. I know myself, I kind of screwed up those waiver and input formats a little bit, didn't get the YAML quite right. It's really great now to be able to just generate these and know that you got all the indentation right. You got your YAML correct, and it looks the way it needs to look. So this is going to be out, like I said, a little bit later this month, maybe a week or two. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dan, and he's going to show how this all works in real life, since I've just fire hosed away about compliance phase.
We've already got a question. Thankfully, I'm actually going to do that as part of the demo. So Sarah, your question I will answer as part of.
All right. Well, let me stop the share and then you can take it over.
I mean, if you didn't stop it, I was just going to steal it anyway. So I'll go back to front on this one. So I'll show our generate commands first of all, because they're nice and easy, quite straightforward. So I'm just going to create a new cookbook, and with the new cookbook, I get the compliance folder, which is really nice. So shout out to Colin. I see Colin's on the call as well. So thanks very much for that. It's hugely helpful. So let's go into the example folder. Just do a quick tree on that one, and we'll see our compliance folders already in there, which is super helpful because I see a lot of customers, and I have got it wrong in the past. What's the exact correct folder structure? What are the did I typo the word inputs? Did I typo the word profiles? I did, by the way. Spoiler. So that's all just taken care of for you now, which is nice. And then sort of as part of development, I've got a cookbook here, which I'll show a bit more of quickly. So I've got a compliance folder with some inputs. I want to check that some kernel modules are disabled because I think they're sort of insecure. Spoiler, they're not really insecure. I just don't want them running. And I've got a profile with some kernel modules I want to see. So I've got some inputs to say, go through the inputs and make sure that the kernel modules are disabled. And then I've got a, where are we? I've got a waiver to say waiver one of the controls that I don't care about later on. So I've got our inputs that kind of feed into our profile, and then we go through that way. And then we've got one of our controls that we sort of ignore, basically, which is pretty cool. That's how it sort of hangs together in the compliance folder. And how we pull that together in a sort of cookbook way. So I've got an attribute here with, say, I'm going to enable the reporter so I can send my things to Chef Automate, or send the compliance details for each of the nodes to automate. We will actually override this for Test Kitchen for reasons that I cannot remember right now, but catch me later when I can remember. The override is just to send it to CLI, which is audit reporter needs to be CLI for kitchen. But we will go back to profiles second. And I've got a default recipe that ties my entire cookbook together. And with the compliance phase, I just say include inputs so I can load all my modules that I said. I've got some inputs that I want to make sure that I want these modules disabled. And then I've got a waiver that says, hey, I don't want this. I want to add this waiver from my compliance folder, please. And then I've got a profile that says, load the pie profile from this current cookbook, which is nice. You can also pick another cookbook if you've got that in your dependency chain. So let's say I depend on a cookbook that's got a bunch of audit controls in. I can say include profile audits or my awesome company _ audit cookbook colon, and then load in one of those profiles that way. I've just got one profile here because I only care about this one thing right now, which is cool. So I've got including inputs, then I do a waiver, and then I've got a profile there. If I hit Kitchen Converge now, also if I'm going too quick for anybody, feel free to just call me out. I can always slow down. but I will hopefully catch the scroll back when it's loaded. Just going to load 17.9 a second. And then the infra phase is starting. So as part of the infra phase, we'll load our profiles, waivers, and our recipes. And you see we're loading all these things at the start of the phase, and then we're going through and we're doing our usual infra client phase, making sure that things are correct on disk. We've got our modules disabled. So we've got our modules here being disabled if they're not already, which is cool. And then we've got our compliance report. So luckily, we've got a no up here with our HTTP port should not be usable. I've got a control that says HTTP port 80 shouldn't be reachable. Well, actually, that's not a thing I care about right now. So I've got a waiver for that. I can go see that in a second. And then I've got a bunch of disabled kernel modules, and I pulled this list from our inputs, which is nice. So as part of our kitchen run, I've just done kitchen converge, and I've done both of those things. And spoiler, they're just InSpec files, so I can actually do a kitchen verify, and I can reuse those tests, that same profile as a kitchen test as well. So I can do the same thing there, and you can load in waivers and InSpec profiles that way, which is really nice. And finally, to tie it all together, so I've now got a kitchen. I've tested my cookbook locally on a Vagrant machine or some sort of virtual box, and then now I want to go bootstrap that thing. So I'm going to bootstrap one of my Raspberry Pis up in the loft somewhere, and I'm going to give it a policy name with Chef Pi, and I'm going to add it to one of my policy groups, in this case, K3 cluster. And as part of that run, it'll bootstrap it and do the exact same thing as I did with Test Kitchen locally. And yes, it's going to complain that I've already got this in Automate already, because I did it earlier on. And it'll do basically what we just did in Test Kitchen, but on a real physical node. As you can see here, if I'll scroll back, whoa, that's going too quick. So we're using the policy file Chef Pi, so it's already computed all of the requirements here, which is nice. And then we've got all the cookbooks it's pulled down. Yes, Sarah. I'll answer that again in a second. And then we've got our modules, inputs, and waivers there as well. And it's doing the exact same thing here. So what we can see here is I've tested the cookbook locally. I've tested all the waivers locally. I've tested all the InSpec profiles locally and said, right, that's exactly what I want. I want to push this whole artifact up to our Automate server using Chef Push, and I'll push that to a policy group using Chef Push, and in this case, K3's -cluster, and it just pushes that whole artifact up there, which is so much more simple than, hey, I've got an InSpec profile over here, I've got my tests over here that are sort of security, and then it's another team worrying about this, and then I've got a thing over here and a thing over here. So I'm just shipping one artifact. I know how to deal with it, and I can version that whole thing together. So we've got a question here saying, Kitchen Verify, is it still using the profile, or do you have information duplicated? No, so I'm actually just using the same profile. With Test Kitchen, I've pointed it at the compliance folder. You might not always want to do this. In this case, I did actually want to do this because I've got a little bit of testing and security happening in the same profile. So you can say my InSpec tests actually live in this path here. So I've repointed the default path to compliance profiles Pi, and rather than the default suite. So it would usually be in a test integration. The test integration default would be the place for that default profile. I've pushed it into another place. So hopefully that answers your question. And I've reused all the input files and reused all the waivers. So I can use the exact same thing for tests to verify that box as I can in the converge phase. So I can just do kitchen verify and make sure those things are happening, because the verify stage is super, super quick. As you saw here, if I do kitchen verify again, try not to use my shortcuts. Do kitchen verify there, it's just going to run InSpec by itself. And that's really, really quick. So that's a nice like way you can use both things at the same time, which is really nice. I think that's probably the end of my demo, unless anyone's got anything else to see. But you see there from the start, you've got a whole artifact you can push up to automate. In fact, I have got one more thing to say. I can show you automate with its how infra and the compliance phase looks. So we've got our 3 nodes here. Yes, it's an actual cluster. So we've got our 3 pies here with our check-ins and all the usual stuff you'd expect to see. So all the actions and anything it did, and the cookbook it did it in. And then if we hop over to the compliance page, you'll see we've got 3 nodes, the platforms, the environments, and the scan. So in this case, the scan is happening as part of the infra phase. And this is being reported at the end of the infra phase. So we're not having to use automate to scan nodes outwards. It's running on the box as part of the infra phase and then reporting at the end of the phase, which is really nice. Cool. I think that's it. Is there anything else? Oh, Larry. Yes. Will the generator allow for configuration for the verify in the kitchen YAML, either as a default or as an option? Yes, there are verify options. I think there's a docken option when you do a generate cookbook. Tim might remember the docken options. I think it might be -- docken possibly. You can do some extra verify there.
Yeah, you can switch between kitchen vagrant, which is default, and kitchen docken. You can also, the other really nice thing you can do is you can create a generator. There's a chef generator command, I believe, that basically copies our generator down and lets you modify that. So if you have a generator that's specific to your business, you can push that out to people's workstations and they can have their own generators. If you want to make sure that the copyrights are always the right way, or you always want a kitchen config to look the right way. If you want to use kitchen EC2, you can do whatever you want within that, because under the hood, the generators are actually just chef cookbooks, which for better or worse, they're chef cookbooks, which makes them somewhat easy to modify if you're familiar with chef. So it's a positive part.
Yeah, it's just chef generator.
Yeah,
which is nice.
There's some magic we do to change the output of the chef run, but it's all just chef under the hood. Chef with chef with chef.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. And the new one that I didn't mention actually, which was chef generate profile, which will do the profiles for you. It'll do profile, waivers, and inputs. So it'll create the folder structure for you and create a waiver with a waiver name for you. And that's really nice to just get you started really easily.
Yeah, and that profile one is kind of, I think, the killer. I'm looking forward to some additions in that. Right now, it's profile specific to the compliance phase, but I think we're gonna do some work there to make that a little more robust, to make it so you can generate, a full standalone InSpec profile with all the different options and flags that you would want for that. We just have to put a little more development into that. So that's going to be really great, because that was one of the things I always struggled with, was like, oh, where do I start with this profile? Like I could init it, but now I'm in another tool. I want to do everything right. And that same CLI, I want to just be in the chef CLI to do all my generation. It's the logical place to generate all your content. So now you don't have to worry about YAML syntax or any of that stuff. So. All right, well, let me share my screen one more time to make Heather happy here. The one announcement I do want to make, other than everything we've talked about here, is to stay on top of everything we're releasing. Like I said, we had a bunch of new stuff in 17.1, 17.4, 17.5. We've got some new workstation stuff that's going to come out here with the generators. We do all those announcements. They all go out to the chef questions discourse. I always want to call it Discord, and then I'm like, no, it's not that. It's not Discord. So go subscribe to that. You can check that out. You can subscribe just to the release announcements if you want, so you won't get other people's questions or anything like that. And you can see everything as it comes in. You'll see all the new info releases, all this new content here. You can see we've got Azure and AWS cloud content that came out. That's like another 50 InSpec resources right there. And then you can see those workstation releases and everything. So with that, now we can take some questions. If anybody has ones that we haven't answered yet.
Yeah, so I don't think I answered Sarah's question properly, which is a bit of a shame. So let me just hit answer live on that one. So the initial question about automate sharing different versions of the same named profile. So if nodes are running different versions of the policy, so if I've got my green pie and my black pie, and they've got different versions because they're in different policy groups, is the version in the InSpec YAML still important to telling them apart? So is it still useful? I would probably say no, because your version for when you're bundling your compliance content with your infra phase, you're then versioning that whole artifact on the outside. You can still bump that version, although it's probably not as useful because you're going to be viewing the policy package as a whole there, rather than just the InSpec file there.
Yep. If you want to leave that as 1.0, just leave it as 1.0. And you can actually even do the same thing really with your cookbooks when you're using policy files, because it's all just going to get shod and bundled up in the policy file. So the versions under the hood actually don't matter, which is kind of nice sometimes for certain workflows. You don't have to worry about version bumps, but if you want to use those to kind of convey to other teams, like, hey, we're making a big change here, this is some big new feature, you want to do semver, nothing stops you from bumping either of those.
Yeah, brilliant.
I think you covered that kitchen verify one. That's here, Dan.
I think so. Yeah, I think we've.
And then we talked about the generator. We talked about test kitchen with a generator. What shows up in the profiles tab? I don't believe these are going to show up in the profiles tab. They're not uploaded profiles in Automate.
Let me just
that's kind of the advantage, is you don't have to upload the profiles manually. You don't have to manually do that upload process and kind of manage versions and that stuff. That goes away. We want to move you into that CI pipeline that you already have for the cookbooks. So you're just going to get new profiles. If you make, one line change, you don't have to go and save that whole profile off and put it back on Automate to get it deployed to all your systems. You just push it out with your cookbooks.
Yeah, so I can show that that compliance folder there actually. So I'll just nab your questions thing.
On my share again.
Yeah. Folder. Yeah, probably. Good. Yes, this is how if I go into compliance, and there is this is too big for my own good here. I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller. Then I've got profiles. It's not going to load now, is it?
A lot of profiles there.
There we
are.
Yeah. And this is the profile that was included with the cookbook, and it's on version 003 for reasons. And that's it, pretty much. That's all you see. And you can see the scan results from all the nodes that scanned and all the nodes that have checked in. Away.
And this would be really similar to if you were sourcing your InSpec profiles already with GitHub or with Supermarket. There's, you can get those profiles with the Audit Cookbook previously from a whole bunch of different places. If you were putting them on the Supermarket, on like a private supermarket, they wouldn't show up in Automate either there. But yeah, you would see them in the actual run because it is a profile that ran on that system.
Yeah. What shows up in the profiles tab? How do I ensure that when I pull the data in like a CSV, the test might be different even if the control name is the same? If your data changes, your data does change, I guess. So your profile can stay the same if your data and your underlying data changes. That's like high data changes, then that's the thing outside OHI. So,
and that would be where if you're trying to export these reports, if you're trying to export that Chef Pie run to a CSV and you want to be able to compare that to other systems, that's where actually versioning that profile within the cookbook might be useful. If you want to have like a third-party auditor or a different part of your business that needs to consume that and understand like, hey, look, we just bumped to a new version of this profile. It's checking something different. And that's why something went red, or that's why something went green. you can do that. You could still version that artifact there. And then when you go into that node in the compliance tab, you'll still see that profiles tab down there, and it would export that as, you know, compliance profile 2.0 or whatever. Cool. I think that's all our questions. Definitely both Dan and I are going to be around in the community Slack. I would encourage everybody to join that. We're around to answer questions along with the InSpec folks. I'm not the product manager for compliance as a whole, so I get a little fuzzy where I'm like, I don't know exactly how that part works. I know how the part that glues it all together works because that was my responsibility. But we can bring in the right people if there's ever questions more specifically about, you know, the InSpec language, the engine there, or compliance and how that works within Automate. We can get the right people in community Slack if anybody has any questions there.
Yeah, so I see there's another question there. I'll just answer that. I'll type that. There's a link in. In fact, I was on this page earlier on. In fact, I have the link up already. With there's some API keys and things. So yeah, that's a great question, which is actually easier answered via text via Slack. So like perfect example there. If you Larry, if you want to just go and re-ask that question either in general or chefing. Again, then we can directly answer you on there. So there's some really cool stuff that going on there. If you're not on the community Slack, I highly recommend you do, because yeah, we're on there. Why wouldn't you be on there?
Cool. All right.
Cool.
Well, thanks for coming, everybody. I don't know if we have anything else that we need to close up with.
Yep. So thank you so much, everybody. If you like what we saw, we encourage you to share the presentation with your teammates and professional networks. The on-demand version should be available soon, and we'll email you as soon as it's ready. You'll be able to access it using the same audience link you're using now. Thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for coming, folks.
See you later.